For the benefit of film scholars and students, Valerie Hobson starred with Roger Livesey and Sabu in a Technicolor movie called The Drum, 1938, and she played the grown-up Estella in David Lean's version of Great Expectations with John Mills. I worked for 2 episodes of a television series called The Champions with a young woman named Alex Vasteda. She was the leading lady, one of the most beautiful girls I have ever seen. Skin like gold, her features looked as though they had been carved out of porcelain. I'll never forget her. I don't even have a photograph of her, but she was certainly one of the most beautiful women that I have ever seen. Alex Vasteda. In the 1960s, in my view, the political situation was this. The class structure started disintegrating very quickly, especially, oddly enough, with the advent of the Beatles. It was the Beatles that began the whole thing. They started the entire psychedelic, so to speak, business of all kinds of businesses. There was a market in the middle of Piccadilly called I Was Lord Kitchener's Valet, and all kinds of things started changing in the 1960s. The interesting thing in the 1950s was that men who were earning £10 a week and raising children from that would buy flags and go stand in the parade and wait till the Queen's coach went by, waved their flags and so forth, and it never occurred to them that the Queen at that time, from only a few of her overseas investments, had an income of £150 million a day. So that was an interesting contrast. But in the 1960s, everything started coming apart, you could say, and then coming together again. It was a great time to be in London, and I was there mostly through the 1960s, apart from a few months in California. I came over here to visit a person I had seen his name in Variety, and he came from near my place in Scotland. I'd never met him, but he had the same name. And I emigrated over here briefly, and we met. His name was James Riddell. He was the vice president of ABC television here in Hollywood. And later on, when I worked on the stage with Howard Keel, I used to draw Howard Keel while he was on the stage. And he saw my signature. He said, "Do you know James Riddell?" I said, "Yes, I know him. I've been over there and met him." He said, "All right, tell him I met you." His dresser, Howard's dresser, was a fellow called Bill, and he told me that when Howard was going around the golf course, he would sing before he hit the ball. Sing in as loud a voice as he could. That's all. Little anecdote. In the early 60s, the Conservative government was voted in, and things began to change fairly rapidly. There were strip clubs opened up in Soho, and things like it. There were things called betting shops. Betting was made legal, and actors used to go in there with earphones and get the message through other earphones from the track, and then they would relay this to the betting stores all over London. This was quite a thing. I was there at one time doing my bit. I met some very interesting characters, including friends of Peter O'Toole. They were sitting broadcasting the races to the betting shops. And everything started loosening up, as I mentioned before. There were not a lot of strip clubs. There wasn't a lot of scandalous activity going on, but Whiskey A Go-Go and all of these things opened up in an area called Soho. which was very interesting at the time, surrounded by theatres and Greek Street, all that area. That I knew that area so well, the west end of London, Piccadilly. I lived between Piccadilly and Leicester Square and Trafalgar Square, right in the heart of London for 4 years. My landlady was the wardrobe woman at the Old Vic, where I had met her. That was in the beginning of the late 1950s. And the man who lived below me was called John Kay, and he had invented television with Logie Baird, a man called Logie Baird. There were two Scots, and when he died, I phoned up several doctors. He had one of these quick cancers. Nobody would come to him because he did not believe in doctors. He was not registered, and the police carried him out in a box, and he was buried in the pauper's grave. He had £1,000 in the bank, which was inherited by a friend from Little Twittering in Sussex, who had never even heard of him. And that was John Kay. He was also a consultant engineer who rebuilt the Waterloo Bridge after the war. It had been bombed heavily during the war. And nobody knows about him until I talk about him. And I'm talking about him now.